So I have my scene here and I want to bring the camera animation from Unreal into DaVinci Resolve, but unfortunately Unreal will not let you export an Alembic file. So we need to open up Blender. The first thing that we're going to do is start in Unreal Engine 5. The first step is to bake this camera. We need all of the camera position data to be baked down into individual keyframes on every single frame. In addition to that, I also do recommend putting a placeholder in your scene to help give you a point of reference so that when you move things around in your compositing software, you have something to reference and look at. So I have in this scene a cube, and I will turn that on right there. And let's say hypothetically I wanted to put some type or text here. Now, this is just a reference, so I'm going to take this cube and drop it into my scene, and it's basically going to be there for extra position data. Now, the first thing I have to do is click on my camera and go to this little wrench here and click on Bake Transform. This window pops up. Set baked key settings to all keyframes. And this is going to be set to all of the frames in my sequence. Click OK, and it's going to create a second transform property of that camera. Now, this first one, let's just delete it. We don't need it anymore, and we also don't want the camera shake. Now, before you do anything, it is also worth checking your camera. So you're going to go to the beginning of your timeline and just watch it back. Does it have all the camera animation properties that we did previously before baking it? So let's hit the space bar, play it back. We can see that there's a little bit of wobble and sway with the camera in the same way that we had that little camera shake in our scene, but it's all baked down into keyframes here, which we can see by clicking on our sequencer, and hey look, there's a lot of keyframes and stuff. Awesome. Let's just double check the rotation. Yep, everything's good. That's exactly what I want it to do. Back to the sequencer. Now we have our camera and we have our cube, our reference point. You can put this anywhere you want, but I know I'm going to put some text right here. So we're going to right click on these two objects and we're going to go to export, and we're going to export this as an FBX. I'm going to put this into a new folder, and I'll just call this file sword camera animation 001. Sure. Now you'll see this window pop up. Don't touch anything. Set it, reset to default. If anything is checked, just let it go as is. Sometimes you might have to check this, but I don't recommend it most of the time. Just hit export, let it do its thing. Now we have to go into either DaVinci Resolve or Blender for a second, but we're going to start with the DaVinci Resolve method first. Obviously, if we want to do some compositing with the scene, we have to render this shot. So I'm going to go up to my clapboard in my sequencer, and I'm going to just do a very basic render here. Go into my settings. I'll get rid of the JPEG sequence just because, force of habit, I like using PNG sequences for my tests. I'm going to add some anti-aliasing, and I'm going to add a game overrides option. Not going to do anything else fancy. Go into my anti-aliasing, set it to 8 for the temporal samples, override anti-aliasing, anti-aliasing set to none, engine warm-up frames to 240, and render warm-up frames. Go into your output, set your render into wherever you want this to be saved. I'm going to make a new folder, and I'll call this tutorial camera animation into DaVinci. Burp. Just like that. Select folder. Okay, cool. Make sure it's at the exact aspect ratio that we want. And this is important if you're going to be doing compositing. Make sure that you are compositing in the output that you plan on rendering in for your final render. So 1920 by 1080 is perfectly fine for this. Click accept, and we are going to hit render. Now I realize I made a little bit of a boo-boo, so I'm going to cancel that render really quick, and I'm going to go into that cube. We don't want this in our scene, so make sure that your reference is turned off. So I'm going to just uncheck the little eye, and then if that doesn't work for you, I also recommend going to the search bar details panel, and you're going to type visible, V-I-S, and we're going to uncheck visible right there. And then another thing, just to make sure, we're going to type HID for hidden, and we're going to look for actor hidden in game, and just also turn this on, which is kind of confusing, but that's besides the point. So now when we hit the clapboard and we hit the render button, our scene is rendering and we don't have that cube in our scene. Now, if you don't know how to use Blender, you can use the FBX method, but this, to me, I have found is more stable and easier a lot of the time. So if you can stomach downloading Blender and giving it a shot, it is worth it. I have my camera animation imported into Blender, and one big issue with this is that while we do have the cube in our scene and the cameras in our outliner, when you export anything from Unreal into Blender, the scene scale is about 1% of its actual size. So I'm going to hit N on my keyboard and go to my camera, and I'm going to hit Alt-Shift-I with my mouse over the scale to clear all of those keyframes on the scale, and then set the scale to 1, 1, and 1, and now we should see our camera. If we lock our camera to our viewport, we can see that we have our little camera animation, and the cube is right there exactly where we needed it to be. So now what I have to do with this Blender scene is I need to make sure that my end frame is exactly as long as my Unreal animation. So I'm going to set this to 720, which is exactly what we want. Scroll back and we can see that our white highlighted space is the length of our baked keyframes. So now what I can do is I can go up to File, Export, Alembic. Now, fortunately for this, we don't need to do any more fussing. I'm going to save this as the Unreal Sword Composite _ABC because I know this is my Alembic file, and I have a little folder here that I'm going to save my Alembics for this project. Export Alembic. Let it go, let it do its thing. Depending on how big your scene is, it might take a little while. But now, back in Fusion, what I'm going to do is go back up to the Fusion tab. Up here, go to Import and Alembic Scene. We're going to navigate to that file, click Open, and it's going to ask us this. Fortunately, unlike the FBX workflow, there's a lot less things that we have to cover, but we want to make sure that our frame rate is exactly what we want. We want to bring in our cameras, we want to bring in points and meshes and UVs and normals most of the time, but if we're just doing basic stuff like this, we can just bring it in as is. Click OK. Now, if we click on this window, we see our little mini map of our stuff. We can see our two main nodes up here. We're going to take these, copy it or cut it, scroll back up here, click in the empty space just above our main nodes, and Control V to paste. Now, we do have a Merge 3D node already here, but if you don't know how to do that, you can select this button to add a Merge 3D. Now, we do need a 3D renderer node, so we're going to click on this button and pipe this 3D renderer node into the merge node, or vice versa. If I hit the 1 key with my 2 viewports selected, we can see that we have our basic empty space inside our scene, but it's obviously not showing inside our main viewport for our render. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this cube, pipe it into the very end, like so, and it's going to merge. Come on, dude. Oh, come on. There we go. There we go. And now we have our cube in our scene. And the reason why I like the Alembic workflow is if you do the FBX workflow, you might have to do the dance of trying to orient your stuff towards the camera. This way, it's so much easier, and it does require Blender, unfortunately, but that's also a very useful tool to learn as well. So with that said, let's use our cube to get our reference point for our position, and if we click on the transform, we can see that the values of the Alembic scene are much, much smaller and much more manageable. So I can go ahead and make a text 3D. Let's select our Merge 3D node and add some text, and we will just call this Talon, which is the name of the sword, and it is very, very large in this scene. If we hold Alt and middle mouse button in our 3D viewport, we can navigate around and scroll around our scene. Unfortunately, the viewport in DaVinci is weird and funky, and I don't like it as much as Blender or Cinema. But hey, there's our text. We can either go up and just position this in our scene like so, or we could copy the cube positions. We can just go and copy that, go into the text 3D, and paste. Like so, and then go back into that cube and get the Y data right here and paste that like so. Now from here, the orientation of our text is a little off center, so we can go to the vertical anchor and set this to that, scale it down, and now we have our text in our scene. And if we play this back like so, our camera is locked in, our type is locked in, Everything is cool. We got our little camera shake. We can see that right there with the little curve of our animation spline. And if we were to hit the single viewport and maybe scale this up a little bit, we can get a better preview of this composite. Scrub through because it is a little slow. And the text is locked into our scene exactly what we wanted it to do. So that's the workflow for Alembics. If you have been confused at any point during this tutorial, do check out my course. It is on my website, and you can start learning how to use DaVinci Resolve for compositing, VFX, for basic video editing, content creation, or if you just want to post your artwork online. If you have questions, comments, concerns, or if you have questions about my course, please let me know in the comment section down below, or hit me up on Instagram at JohnJagsney, and I'd be happy to help answer anything that you might be struggling with. With that out of the way, that is my workflow from bringing an Unreal camera and doing some basic VFX compositing principles into DaVinci Resolve. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate you spending some time with me. I hope the time was worth it because you're not getting it back. But I will leave you with the final tip, and that is to eat 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, and you'll make some gains. Goodbye, my friends. Bye.